Welcome to Eyhurst Farmhouse in Surrey, an absolutely stunning family home set in exquisite grounds that's brimming with history. The core is a 15th century timber-framed hall house, which would have had a standard layout of a main double-height room in the middle with an open fire and two-storey sections, one at each end, one being the service rooms for storage, etc., and the other the solar with the higher status living and sleeping rooms for the family. This example has had several waves of development since then, mainly in the 17th, 19th and 20th centuries. We'll talk a little bit more about the layout and the evolution as we wander around. We start off in this parlour and reception hallway. This is part of an early 19th century cross wing which replaced the solar bay of the original medieval house. So that would have been the rooms that were higher status, where the family would have had their main sleeping rooms and living quarters. Across the hallway we have this elegant drawing room, which is the other half of that early 19th century addition. Moving on, this was the main hall, which would have had the ceiling added by the late 16th century or early 17th, when the first chimney was built against the service end of the room. There are no remaining traces of that first chimney, which would have probably been wattle and daub and replaced with a brick one in the early 17th century. The ceiling's also been raised since it was originally added, probably in the late 19th century. Later refurbishments have made it difficult to see exactly how and when the changes happened, but thankfully that work was done with great care and the frame of the original house was restored beautifully, so it's still easy to see how it all sat together originally. The owner tells us that there are still soot marks in the roof space above where the open fire was in the 15th century. Fittingly, the kitchen sits in the old service bay, although initially cooking would have been done in a separate building to reduce the risk of fire. Here again you can see the various elements of the oak frame and the sheer scale of some of these timbers. This screen passage between the hall and the service bay, that's the dining room and the breakfast room now, is original and an indicator that this was a substantial high-status hall house. The quality of the carving on the timbers, even at the service end, also supports this. This family room is a 17th or 18th century addition, which was originally detached and likely to have been a brew house. When it was joined to the main house sometime between 1841 and 1871, that would also involve adding the passage that we've just walked along, that runs along the lower end of the hall. As we now move into the modern part of the home and the swimming pool added by the current owners, we'll talk a little bit more about where this house sits in the history of the area. Eyhurst Farm was part of Chipstead Manor and comprised around 350 acres, used mainly for livestock, cattle and sheep predominantly. The name was morphed several times over the years and has appeared as Eyhurst as it is now, Highhurst, and Eyhurst with an I instead of the EY. Chipstead is first recorded in the 7th and 8th centuries when 500 acres belonging to Purbright Manor were given to Chertsey Abbey. This area was administered from the Abbey's manor of Caulston. In terms of this particular property, in 1388 the property of Chipstead Manor was passed to Hugh Quetch, a knight of the Shire, so it's likely that this hall house was built under his ownership in the late 14th or early 15th century. So back up to the ground floor, we're now in the range added in the 20th century, making a larger service wing and with accommodation for servants, etc. This room was 2 rooms, used by servants in the early part of the 20th century. The wall panel isn't original, but it makes a wonderful games room. The stair turret was added after 1895 and is likely to be Edwardian. There would have been an older turret added when the hall was originally sealed, i.e. when it had its ceiling fitted. The windows reused glass from 1679, 1681, presumably from that original turret. Upstairs we see more of this original structure, and we can see where the beam was raised, as it also was downstairs, to allow headroom along the passageway. two main bedrooms, including this principal bedroom, are over the 19th century cross wing. These make lovely family accommodation now, with stunning views over the grounds. One has an ensuite and dressing area. The other is opposite a large luxury bathroom, a virtual ensuite if you like. We move back across this central hall area. Again, you can see where the beams were raised. So here we move into the upper rooms of the original service bay, with two more double bedrooms, a single and a bathroom. And then on into the early 20th century service wing, where there are two more ensuite double rooms. On the right here we have the servants' stairs from those 20th century additions. So coming back across the upper part of the main hall, have another look at those beautiful timbers and back down through the hall downstairs. So back outside, and we'll talk some more of the people who lived here over the years. We've found electoral roll and census information showing these occupiers from 1832 onwards, with some gaps of a few years. In 1832, James Bethel was listed as the occupier of the farm at a yearly rent of £50. By this time the cross wing at the front had already been added, but the brew house was still a separate building. By 1837, Benjamin Taylor had taken over as the occupier. He was a farmer born in 1801 who lived here with his wife, 4 children and 8 servants, 2 female and 6 male, probably for both the house and the farm. And he ran the farm until at least 1847. By 1849, Percival Brown had taken over. Born in around 1817, he is listed on the 1851 census as employing 13 labourers for the 360-acre farm. He lived in the house with his wife, son, daughter and 7 farm labourers, and he was here until at least 1855. By 1857, Walter Napper was the farmer here, staying for a few years, but as he lived here between census years, we know very little about him. In 1861, John Langlands was here, employing 7 men and 1 boy. He was from Scotland and seems to have brought his whole household with him. It comprised his wife, sister, brother-in-law, a cook, housemaid, bailiff and 3 ploughmen, all of whom were born in Scotland. He remained here for many years until at least 1875, so 15 years or so. During this time his family grew and so did his team. By 1871 he had 5 children, 8 servants, 3 domestic and 5 farm, all living at the house, and his original bailiff was now living in one of the farm cottages, referred to as Bailiff's Cottage. He appears to have been really thriving. Perhaps it was he who joined the brew house to the main house. In 1879 he had moved on. We found him at another farm in Kent, and Robert William Hurd had taken over. The farm is now a little smaller at 318 acres, and he's employing 6 men. Hurd was born in Yorkshire in 1850, and at the time of the 1881 census lived here with his wife, mother and just 1 servant. Although we don't know how the farm cottages were being used, they may have also been supporting him. He wasn't here for long, and by 1891 he's living in Croydon and is a retired farmer, although he's only 41, so I'm sure there's a story there. In the 1891 census, John Bale from Devon is now here and listed as a farm bailiff rather than a farmer himself. He lived here with his wife and 3 children. Now the farm labourers and their families are all shown in separate households on the farm rather than part of his household. And we can see how this business structure is evolving over the years. We're not sure if they were in this building or the others around, but they're very definitely separate households now. By 1895, John Bale was working on a different farm in Chipstead, and Isaac Boniface from Sussex is farm bailiff here. In 1901 census, his household consists of his wife and 2 adult children who were both working on the farm. The remaining farm labourers are shown as separate households, mainly in the farm cottages. He ran the farm until about 1905, when he moved on to be bailiff at the manor in Epsom. We have a gap of a few years now which we haven't been able to plug, but by 1911 Thomas Twidwell has taken over. There was a lot of work done to the house around this time, either before or soon after Thomas moved in, adding the modern service wing and the new staircase. He's shown as a farm steward and is living here with his wife and a general servant. Again, the labourers are in separate households listed as Eyhurst, Burr Heath. We think these may have been the cottages and other farm buildings, but may have included the new service wing. The owner of the house at this time is also identifiable as Edward Stanhope Morphew, a wool merchant. He built a large warehouse and shop at 112 Jermyn Street in London, and seems to have had a large household at a house in Chipstead, referenced as Eyhurst, Burr Heath, the same as the farm labourers' households. We believe this is referring to Eyhurst Court, which is very close by and is now luxury flats. It was built in 1900, so this seems to tie together well. After 1911, the records are sparser, although no census records currently available. A Captain Ferber was there in 1923, and in 1926 it was listed to let to a substantial tenant. Now, 89 acres of the farmland and associated buildings, excluding this house, were offered for sale in 1949. We believe the remainder of the land was sold in the 1990s to form the golf course next door. But the house is now a wonderful home with 5 acres of beautiful grounds. The current owners have done an amazing job of restoring it to its former beauty, showing respect to each of the periods of its development over the centuries. And of course, they've added that wonderful swimming pool complex downstairs.